This is not going to be an introduction to the Environmental Voter Project. This is not like a 100 level college course. This is more like a 300 or 400 level seminar where we're just going to skip all the introductory stuff and go into a deep dive into some of the data that we're seeing in Arizona. I'm going to spend about maybe, I don't know, 11, 12, 13 minutes presenting this data. Then we're going to have a very quick 7-8 minute Q&A so that we can get into actually making calls and calling these voters in Arizona. So without further ado, oh, Deborah, did you have something to
Yes.
say?
Please put your questions as you think of them in the chat so that I can direct them after he finishes to Nathaniel for answering them, okay?
Great, thank you, Deborah. And it is a large group, so forgive us if we mute you, but please try to mute yourself so that everybody can hear. All right, I'm gonna start by sharing my screen, and we're gonna dive into what Arizona looks like in the upcoming midterms for the environmental movement. So this is what the next hour and a half is going to look like. We're going to have an 11, 12-minute briefing followed by a short Q&A session. Then the already trained callers will be able to start calling. For people who have not been trained with us before, you can then be trained with Deborah and then start making calls. And at the very end, as Deborah will explain to you, you can come back in and have a quick debrief. The Environmental Voter Project is a nonpartisan nonprofit that is laser focused on just these two things: finding non-voting environmentalists and turning them into more consistent voters. That's it. That is also all I am going to tell you about the Environmental Voter Project, because we are going to dive right into the data today, because I know that most, if not all of you, are familiar with our work and you are here for the data. All right. Over the next 4 months, or now 3 months and 28 days, I think, we are targeting 247,318 voters. Who are these people? They are registered to vote. They have a very, very high likelihood of not just caring about climate and the environment, but actually listing it as their #1 priority over all other issues. And this number, this 247,000 number, it is already just our treatment group. As I think many of you know, we submit our work to randomized control trials. So this is the number we have after we've already set aside some unlikely to vote environmentalists in our control group, so that after the election, we can compare turnout in those two groups and actually measure how much of an impact we had. All right, so what does 247,000 mean in a state like Arizona? Well, for some context, you can see on that first bullet point, fewer than 2.4 million ballots were cast last time there was a midterm election in Arizona. So that means our target population is about 10.5, 10.6%, or equal to about 10.6% of all ballots that were cast last time there was a midterm in this state. So this is a big, rich opportunity for the environmental movement in Arizona. Also, Arizona happens to be a state that gives us a lot of heartburn lately. A lot of really close elections, huh? 2018, the US Senate race was decided by fewer than 56,000 votes. The 2020 presidential race was decided by less than 10,500 votes. And again, we're targeting almost 250,000. And just a very, very quick overview of the elections. Mark Kelly is defending his US Senate seat that is currently rated as a toss-up. So not just competitive, but so competitive that the Cook Political Report is calling it a toss-up. The open gubernatorial race is also so competitive that Cook Political Report rates it as a toss-up. And 4 of the 9 congressional seats are currently rated as competitive. And in the next slide, I'm going to dig into the 9 congressional districts. Moreover, you can't get any tighter than the state Senate and the state Assembly in Arizona. Or I'm sorry, I should say the state House. It's not the state Assembly in Arizona. And as you'll see, not only are those 2 houses extraordinarily tight, but there are lots of competitive seats. So Arizona I mean, every voter you talk to tonight and next month and the month after that, well, they're both going to be casting ballots in a tight Senate and a tight gubernatorial race. And chances are they're going to be casting ballots in a tight congressional race and a tight state Senate or state assembly race. I mean, this is just such a high ROI volunteer opportunity for you. All right, what do we know about these 247,000 people? Well, if you look at the age breakdown at the bottom there, you'll see that they are disproportionately young. Now, on its own, that shouldn't be surprising. We're talking to people who list climate and the environment as their top priority, after all. But what this slide doesn't really tell you is that's far more lopsided toward young people than we're used to seeing in states. This is really, really lopsided. We're talking about 74% of our target universe is under the age of 35. But in the overall electorate in Arizona, only 27% are under 35. Another interesting thing that you'll see in the age breakdown here is that 50 to 64 range. Gen Xers. This is not unusual to Arizona. We are seeing this more and more often in our research, and we're not the only people to see it. Pew is seeing it. Yale Program on Climate Change Communications is seeing it. Gen Xers care the least about the climate. And I say that as a very young Gen Xer, but a Gen Xer not still the same. It is not as simple as the older you are, the less likely you are to care deeply about climate and the environment. As you can see, 65 and up in Arizona is far more disproportionately represented in our target universe than these 50 to 64-year-olds. All right, let's get to sex. And again, voter file records, if you've heard me talk about voter data before, but I still think it's worth making this clear. They track sex rather than gender in pretty much every state. And as you'll notice, there are really big unknown numbers. That's because Arizona is a state that doesn't require you to put down what your sex is. And so you'll see there are high unknown numbers in this data. But even with those high unknown numbers, we see a pretty big, I mean, it's typically called a gender gap. In this case, it's a sex gap, but women are more likely to care deeply about climate and the environment than men are. And we see this in Arizona as well. Finally, our target universe is disproportionately made up of people of color. You'll see, again, we use the term Caucasian and Hispanic and Asian because these are the terms used in voter files. But white people are really underrepresented in our target audience. And Hispanic and Asian American and Pacific Islander and indigenous people are very overrepresented in our target universe. This is not something that is unique to Arizona. Well, the Native American and indigenous overrepresentation is, but Hispanic and Asian Americans are consistently overrepresented in our target universes. We're seeing this in almost every single one of our 17 states. It's particularly prominent among Hispanics in Arizona, though. All right, let's get into the newly drawn congressional districts. Arizona has 9 newly drawn congressional districts. There are 3 of them that you'll see that are within a 7-point partisan lean. Now, what do I mean by a partisan lean? I mean, if you look at the first congressional district there, David Schweikert's district, it has an R+7 partisan lean. What that means is it is 7 points more Republican trending than the nation as a whole. Does that mean it is always going to move that way? No. But historically, over the last, I think, 4 midterms, that's where the people who are in this newly drawn district have trended. Okay? And so you'll see CD1 is fairly competitive. CD4, Congressional District 4, Greg Stanton's district, that's only Democratic lean +1. CD6 is an open district. That's R+7. And then you see the second congressional district. That's Democrat Tom O'Halloran's district. He is defending it, but this new district is R plus 15. That is also considered a very competitive district. So 4 out of these 9 congressional districts are very competitive. And as you'll see in that final column on the right there, the number of EVP targets in each of these congressional districts. And you'll see in many of these really competitive districts, we have a whole lot of our targets, of these super environmentalists who have never voted in a midterm before. CD1, we have almost 34,000 targets. CD4, we have over 38,000. Now CD2 and CD6 are a little bit lower, but we have big opportunities to make a difference in Arizona, not just for the gubernatorial, not just for the US Senate, not just for the state Senate and the state House, but also in these really tight congressional districts. Every ballot that's cast, chances are, has a lot of really important races on it. Finally, why are we calling? Well, we always call because we know from our randomized control trials that the scripts we use do make a difference. They are proven to increase turnout over our control group. What is the second reason we call? There are lots of people who we can't canvass, or we can't get with digital ads, or we can get with mail, but we want to get them with an additional input. And then the third reason in Arizona is, holy moly, are a lot of these voters that we're targeting people for whom we have cell phone numbers or landline telephone numbers. The fact that almost 75% of our targets are people who have phone numbers in the voter file is a really high number. These people are gettable. They are gettable. And so yes, it is enormously important for us to call them. If you just look at that dark green 3/4, 183,415 super environmentalists who have never voted in a midterm for whom we have phone numbers. Keep that number in mind, 183,000. Let me go back to this slide. See what that margin of victory was in the 2020 presidential? Only 10,457 votes. The US Senate seat was decided by 56,000 votes. And we have 183,000 phone numbers for these super environmentalists who are already registered to vote. They've just never showed up for a midterm before. This is a big opportunity. It's a big opportunity for the environmental movement. And it's a big opportunity for you, because I know you're not here because you just like holding a phone up to your ear. I know you're here because you want to make a difference. You want to have an impact. And you know, part of the reason we dig into all of this data at the Environmental Voter Project is we know that you want to have an impact. We don't want to ask you to do things that are not impactful. Not just because I like to think that we're nice, but because we know you're not going to come back if you're not convinced that you're having an impact. And so we think it's very important to be really transparent with all of you with this data that we're seeing. And we're going to have a lot of these state-specific briefings over the next 4 months. But in particular, boy, is Arizona a great opportunity for us in a big capital US sense. It's not just the Environmental Voter Project, but for all of you who want to be sure that your volunteer time is going towards something that actually makes a difference. So I'll close with, this is what the calendar looks like ahead of us in Arizona. The primary is coming up on August 2nd. Why is the primary important? Well, not just because people are going to win it or lose it, but because this is a really efficient opportunity to turn non-voters into voters. Voting is a habit-forming behavior, just like any behavior. And if we can get one of these low propensity environmental voters to show up for their primary, I guarantee you they will show up again this fall for their general election. This is how you teach people to vote. Moreover, whether you vote or not is public record. So we get someone to vote in this primary, 6 to 8 weeks afterwards, there's a big bright red beacon next to their name in every voter file telling every campaign, this person just voted, go get them. Once the election is over, you'll see we're going to immediately start up again for the general. you can go to the Get Involved page on our website, and you can sign up for any of these other phone banks that you see during the primary. Once you are trained, you can get on a list, and we will just every week send you the credentials so you can log in and make calls by yourself from home. So once you're trained, you don't need to attend these phone banks if you don't want to. And then certainly during the general, under the Get Involved page, we'd love to have you sign up for canvassing as well, and we will be calling. All right. I would love, 7:17 on the East Coast. How about that, Deborah? Perfect.
Very well done.
Perfect timing. So
let's see if you can do the questions.
Okay.
Well, we do have a couple of questions, and I'm sure some more will come in. Just by way of background, can you just briefly review how EVP knows that 185 environmental voters, how you find them, the methodology, just give an overview of that?
Absolutely. So we build what's called predictive models. And before I explain this, I just want to preface it by saying this is the same tool that sophisticated presidential and US Senate races and gubernatorial races right now use to target voters. No one targets by demographic group anymore. What they do is they build predictive models on voter files so that they can individually identify target voters. And this is how it works. And I'm going to give you an example by using what EVP does, but it's very similar to what campaigns do. We start by polling enormous numbers of people. We'll poll like 10,000 people per state. And we will ask them what their #1 issue priority is. Let's say 1,000 people, I'm just guessing on that number, but let's say 1,000 people in Arizona told us that climate or some other environmental issue is their top priority. Well, then it's very easy for us to start working with data scientists to figure out, okay, what do we know about these 1,000 people who just told us climate's their #1 priority? What voter file data is there on them? What publicly available data can we find on them? We only use publicly available data, but there's a lot of data out there. And then we work with data scientists to start finding other people like them in the Arizona voter file. And we use thousands of data points to build these rich profiles. And a good way to think of it is it's kind of like an insurance company building an actuarial table, right? They need to know how to sell you a life insurance policy. So first, they try to figure out your health background and your medical history and whether you like to dive out of airplanes and how much you exercise. And they need to predict how expensive a policy you're going to need. Well, we kind of do the same thing. We build these predictive models to try to help us find other environmentalists out there. I know it sounds like a convoluted process, but at the end of it, what we're able to do is assign a score from 0 to 100 to every single voter in the voter file, telling us not just how likely they are to care about climate and the environment, but how likely they are to list it as their #1 priority. And then what we do is we just take the top 15%. We just go after people who have a higher than 85% likelihood of listing climate as their #1 priority over all others. So does that mean we've spoken to every voter in Arizona? No, absolutely not. But we have built a very precise, very accurate way to predict who the super environmentalists are, and then just taken that to the voter file, and we don't need data scientists for the second step, which is just getting rid of the good voters and only talking to the bad ones.
Great. Well, Nathaniel, a couple of questions came together. They're really about other methodologies besides phone banking. Some people have raised the point that you mentioned how much our target-rich group is overemphasized the youth, and that youth don't tend to pick up phones, or they have, they let it go to voicemail and so forth, that texting might be a more effective technique. People asked about whether there's going to be canvassing in Arizona, and finally about postcarding. There's been postcarding in other states. Are we going to do postcarding in Arizona? So lots of questions about methods.
Really, really great questions. So first let me start with, just so you know, that the Environmental Voter Project ourselves, without volunteers, will be doing digital ads and direct mail to these people. But then things that volunteers are going to be involved with. Yes, we are canvassing, and we will be canvassing every day. that it's not dangerously hot, every day in Arizona. So if you live in Arizona or you live close by and would like to travel there, you can go to the Get Involved page of our website and say that you're interested in canvassing, and we will help you. We will help onboard you, train you, get you the materials, and you can be off to the races. As far as texting, we will not be texting most likely this fall. And the reason is this. As some of you know, the mobile phone carriers at the end of last year started to put in new rules, essentially saying that you can't text people unless they've already opted in to receiving those texts. Now, some organizations have continued texting anyway. Some of them are doing it because they think that they won't get fined. We are a little bit more conservative with our donors' money. We don't want to have money and time go towards paying fines. But more importantly, we have learned from mobile phone carriers that only a portion of the texts that volunteers are sending to voters are actually getting through, because mobile phone carriers are blocking them if people haven't already opted in. I say this simply to say I don't think it is inappropriate for certain groups to be texting. I think it is totally fine for other groups to be texting. But the reason why EVP has stopped texting is because if we ask volunteers to do something, we want to guarantee you that, one, your text is actually going to get through to the voter, and two, that what you're doing is having an impact. And we no longer can assure you that texting campaigns have an impact because of these rules. Does that mean that it's not worthwhile for other groups to do it? No, no. We got to throw the kitchen sink at this midterm. But that's why we are not doing it. As far as postcards, we probably won't be postcarding into Arizona this year. We will be postcarding into New Mexico. Because we have already had 3 postcarding campaigns this year, people who have already postcarded with us, we have reached out to them to give them first option of getting into the postcarding campaign, because they've already done so much with us this year. And then pretty soon, if there's room, we're going to open that up. So stay tuned on postcarding, but I do want to be sort of transparent about what we're doing with postcarding.
Great. One more question, I think, before you go. I think a really important one. If a person references the Supreme Court's EPA decision in our conversations with them, is there going to be a canned response, or do you have a response that you would recommend?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. There is not a canned response, and we do not suggest that you try to get into a conversation with them about the EPA thing. And here's why. Not because it's not infuriating and something that I'm sure a lot of people want to talk about, but because all of the behavioral science research points us towards one basic thing. And that is, if you're trying to change someone's behavior, what you should not do, as counterintuitive as it might sound, is rationally convince them of the importance of their vote. And I know that sounds crazy. I know that actually sounds like what you ought to be doing. But the truth is, there is a really, really good reason why we simply want to try to find out if this person, who we know, by the way, doesn't vote in midterms, plans to vote in a midterm. And the reason is this. If you ask people to do something that they have never done before, that they know deep down society views as important, they're likely to just say, yeah, sure, why not? I'll vote. And that's like a trap closing. It's like a trap closing. Because what that allows us to do is, right before the election, follow up with them and say, hey, Deborah, remember back earlier this month you said that you were going to vote? Well, Tuesday's the election, and it's your opportunity to follow through on your promise. And then we get to equate the act of voting with whether Deborah keeps her promise or not, which is a much, much stickier, more powerful message than me trying to rationally convince someone of the value of their one vote over a denominator of millions. So I know I'm speaking in broad theoretical terms here, because the way this actually happens is you call up a stranger and they're like, what do you think about the EPA case? And you can't like start talking about behavioral science research. But the reason I say this is we, trust your judgment, but we are a nonpartisan organization. We would prefer that you not get into discussions about this. And most importantly, what we do know is that the best way to get these people to vote is to instead try to get them to say, yes, I'm going to vote, and leave it at that. That is what is proven to work. I know that's kind of a frustrating answer, but we have thought about having canned responses to these things, but we really just want you to push back on, we are a nonpartisan organization, merely calling to see if you're intending to vote. That's it.
Well, Nathaniel, there are a couple more questions, but I think I can handle them in the briefing. Then I'll let you take off.
Great.
Or get on the phone with us, whichever.